The evening sun cast long shadows across the neat suburban streets as Colonel James Richardson drove home from the base. After a grueling 14-hour day overseeing training exercises, all he wanted was a hot shower and the leftover lasagna waiting in his fridge. His dark blue sedan hummed quietly as he turned onto Maple Avenue, just 3 blocks from the small house he'd called home for the past 5 years. Richardson had changed out of his uniform before leaving the base, preferring the comfort of a plain gray t-shirt and jeans for the drive home. 22 years in the Army had taught him to appreciate these small comforts. The radio played softly in the background, a jazz station he'd discovered shortly after moving to town. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror broke his peaceful moment. Richardson checked his speedometer. He was going exactly at the limit. He hadn't run any stop signs or made any illegal turns. Still, years of respecting authority had him smoothly pulling over to the curb, turning down his radio and placing his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, where they could be easily seen. He watched in the side mirror as the police officer approached. Something about the officer's walk, stiff hand already resting on his holster, made Richardson's stomach tighten. After years of commanding troops and reading body language, he recognized hostility when he saw it. License and registration, the officer demanded without introduction, his voice sharp. The name on his badge read Sloan. "Good evening, officer," Richardson replied calmly. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Officer Sloan's face hardened. "I said license and registration now." Richardson nodded. "My registration is in the glove compartment and my wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for them now if that's okay." "Just keep your hands where I can see them," Sloan snapped, his right hand now fully gripping his holstered weapon. "Sir, I need to reach for my documents to provide what you've asked for," Richardson explained, maintaining eye contact through the side mirror. "I'm also an Army colonel. My military ID is in my wallet as well." Something flashed across Sloan's face. Disbelief, maybe, or disdain. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Secretary of Defense." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Step out of the vehicle now." Richardson's training kicked in. Remain calm, follow instructions, de-escalate. "I'm happy to step out, officer, but I'd like to understand the reason for this stop." That was when Officer Sloan drew his gun, pointing it directly at Richardson's head. "I said get out of the car. You people always think you can ask questions instead of following orders." The words "you people" hung in the air between them. Richardson felt a cold wave wash over him, the kind he'd felt in combat zones when situations turned unpredictable. Slowly, telegraphing each movement, he opened the car door with his left hand while keeping his right hand visible. "I'm exiting the vehicle now," he narrated calmly, stepping out onto the asphalt. At 6'1", Richardson stood slightly taller than Sloan, but he made himself appear smaller, non-threatening. Hands open at chest level, across the street a porch light flicked on. Mrs. Chen, his neighbor who often shared homemade dumplings with him, stepped outside. Behind her he could see her teenage son Tom with a phone in hand, its camera clearly pointed toward the scene unfolding by Richardson's car. "Face the vehicle and put your hands on the roof," Sloan ordered. Gun still drawn, Richardson complied, the metal of his car roof warm under his palms. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. I'd appreciate knowing why I've been stopped." "You fit the description," Sloan muttered, moving closer. "The description of whom? There must be some mistake." Richardson kept his voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through him. In the distance he heard more car doors, voices. "A suspicious person reported in the area," Sloan replied vaguely, his gun still aimed at Richardson's back. "You're driving through this neighborhood looking around houses." "I live here, officer. 1482 Maple Avenue. That's my house right there. 3 doors down." Richardson nodded toward his modest ranch-style home, its porch light automatically switched on as darkness fell. "Sure you do," Sloan scoffed. "Rich neighborhood like this." The implication was clear, and Richardson felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. It wasn't the first time he'd faced such assumptions, but having a gun pointed at him for driving home was a new low. More neighbors had emerged now. The Patels from across the street stood on their lawn. Dr. Rivera from 2 houses down approached cautiously, his medical bag in hand as always. "Is everything okay here?" Dr. Rivera called out, keeping a safe distance but clearly concerned. Officer Sloan didn't turn. "Police business. Stay back." Richardson caught Dr. Rivera's eye. They had barbecued together just last weekend. It's okay, Ray, just a misunderstanding. Another police car pulled up, its lights adding to the surreal glow illuminating the scene. Two more officers stepped out, a tall woman with a tight bun and an older man with salt and pepper hair. What's the situation, Sloan? The older officer asked, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Suspicious individual, possibly casing houses. Refused to comply with instructions, Sloan reported, his gun still trained on Richardson. That's not accurate, officers, Richardson stated clearly, addressing the newcomers. I was simply driving home when I was pulled over. Officer Sloan hasn't told me why I was stopped, and he drew his weapon when I asked for clarification. The female officer frowned, stepping closer to read Richardson's license plate. She spoke into her radio briefly, then approached. Sir, is this your vehicle? Yes, officer. Registered in my name, James Richardson. I live at 1482 Maple, just down the block. My driver's license and Army ID are in my back pocket. She glanced at her older colleague, who nodded. You can retrieve your ID slowly, sir. With deliberate movements, Richardson reached back and pulled out his wallet. He carefully extracted his military ID first, holding it up so all three officers could see the photo, rank, and official markings. The older officer's eyebrows rose. Colonel? Yes, sir. 22 years of service, currently stationed at Fort Meadows overseeing combat training operations. The female officer stepped closer, examining the ID. This appears legitimate. She turned to Sloan, whose gun had lowered slightly but remained drawn. Officer Sloan, why exactly was this vehicle stopped? Sloan's jaw tightened. Dispatch reported a suspicious vehicle matching this description. That's interesting, the older officer replied. Because I just came from the station and there were no such reports this evening. A small crowd had gathered now, at least 10 neighbors standing at a respectful distance but clearly watching. Most had phones out recording. Richardson maintained his composed stance, hands back on the roof of his car as instructed, though the female officer had given him a small nod indicating he could probably lower them. Look, Sloan insisted. He was driving slowly around the neighborhood. That's suspicious behavior. I was driving exactly at the speed limit, Richardson countered evenly, and I was heading directly home from work. Mrs. Chen stepped forward from across the street. He lives here. He's my neighbor for 5 years. Tom, her son, added, we have the whole thing on video, from when the officer first pulled him over. The older officer sighed heavily, then turned to Sloan. Holster your weapon. Officer. His tone left no room for argument. For a moment, it seemed Sloan might refuse. His hand tightened on his gun, and Richardson felt rather than saw the tension spike in the man's posture. Then, with obvious reluctance, Sloan lowered the weapon and returned it to his holster. Sir, the female officer addressed Richardson. I apologize for this situation. You're free to go, of course. Richardson nodded but didn't move. Thank you, officer, but I'd like to file a formal complaint about this incident. Sloan snorted. Good luck with that. The older officer shot him a warning look. Officer Sloan, return to your vehicle and wait for me there. He turned back to Richardson. Sir, I'm Sergeant Phillips. This is Officer Lopez. We take these matters very seriously, and yes, you have every right to file a complaint. Richardson finally lowered his hands from the car roof, turning to face the officers properly. The neighbors were still watching, still recording. Tom Chen gave him a thumbs up from across the street. This isn't the first time I've experienced profiling, Richardson said quietly, so only the two officers could hear him. But it is the first time I've had a gun pointed at me on American soil, in my own neighborhood by someone sworn to protect and serve. Officer Lopez looked genuinely troubled. Colonel, if you're willing, I'd like to take your statement right now. And those videos your neighbors have taken would be very helpful for our internal review. As the crowd of neighbors murmured among themselves, Richardson noticed Dr. Rivera approaching Officer Sloan's patrol car, phone held high as if to ensure the officer remained in view of its camera. Other neighbors had formed a loose semicircle, their presence a silent statement of support. The confrontation was over, but Richardson knew this was just the beginning. 22 years of military service had taught him about fighting the right battles, and this was one he couldn't walk away from, not just for himself, but for everyone who might find themselves looking down the barrel of a gun simply for driving home. The lights from the police cars painted the quiet neighborhood in alternating flashes of red and blue, Colonel Richardson stood tall beside Officer Lopez as she took notes on his statement. Despite the evening chill that had settled over the street, Richardson felt a trickle of sweat run down his back, the lingering effect of having a gun pointed at him minutes earlier. "And you say Officer Sloan never stated a clear reason for pulling you over?" Lopez asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "That's correct," Richardson confirmed. "When I asked, he simply said I fit the description, and later mentioned something about a suspicious person in the neighborhood. But Sergeant Phillips already confirmed there were no such reports tonight." From the corner of his eye, Richardson could see Officer Sloan sitting in his patrol car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead with rigid posture. Sergeant Phillips stood beside the car, speaking into his radio with a grim expression. Tom Chen approached, his phone still in hand. "Colonel Richardson, I got everything on video starting from when he first pulled you over. You can hear him clearly when he said that phrase." The teenager glanced uncomfortably toward Officer Lopez. "You mean when he said you people?" Richardson asked quietly. Tom nodded. "Yeah, and more. The mic picked up everything." Officer Lopez looked up sharply. "Would you be willing to share that footage with us, young man? It would be very helpful for our investigation." "Already uploaded it to the cloud so it can't be deleted," Tom said, a hint of pride in his voice. "My mom said I should do that right away. I can send you the link." More neighbors had gathered now, forming small clusters on the sidewalk. Richardson recognized most of them. People he'd waved to on his morning runs, helped with heavy groceries, or chatted with at community events. Mrs. Patel approached with a glass of water, which Richardson accepted gratefully. "This is terrible." "James," she said, her voice tinged with motherly concern, "in our neighborhood of all places. We've always felt so safe here." Richardson took a sip of water before responding. "Safety means different things to different people, Mrs. Patel." Dr. Rivera joined them, medical bag still in hand. "Are you all right, James?" "Your heart rate elevated. Blood pressure likely through the roof after an encounter like that. Want me to check you out?" "I'm fine, Ray, but thank you," Richardson assured him, though the offer touched him. "Not my first time dealing with high-stress situations." "But it should be your last time dealing with this particular type of situation," Dr. Rivera insisted, shooting a pointed look toward Sloan's patrol car. Sergeant Phillips approached their small group, his face professionally neutral but his eyes troubled. "Colonel Richardson, I want to personally apologize for this incident. This is not how our officers are trained to conduct traffic stops." Richardson met the sergeant's gaze directly. "With all due respect, Sergeant, this wasn't just an improperly conducted traffic stop. This was racial profiling at best, and at worst—" He left the sentence unfinished. Sergeant Phillips didn't flinch from the accusation. "I understand, sir. That's why I've already contacted my captain and our internal affairs division. They're sending someone to take statements tonight, not tomorrow, not next week, but tonight." A murmur rippled through the neighbors at this news. "That's unusually fast," Richardson observed. "It's unusually serious," Phillips countered. "An officer drawing a weapon without clear cause is a major incident. Add in the other factors, plus multiple civilian witnesses and video evidence." He glanced around at the gathered neighbors, many still holding up phones. "Let's just say some situations demand immediate attention." Officer Lopez, who had been quietly taking notes nearby, stepped forward. "Colonel, we'd like to get formal statements from as many witnesses as possible. Would it be all right if we used your living room as a temporary interview space? It might be more comfortable for everyone than standing out here in the dark." Richardson nodded. "Of course." As they began walking toward his house, Richardson noticed Officer Sloan exit his patrol car, his face contorted with anger. Sergeant Phillips moved to intercept him, but Sloan brushed past, heading straight for Richardson. "You think you're special because you wear a uniform?" Sloan called out, his voice carrying across the lawn. "You think that makes you better than me?" The crowd fell silent. Richardson paused mid-step, turning slowly to face the approaching officer. "Officer Sloan," Sergeant Phillips warned. "Stand down." "That's an order." Sloan ignored him, stopping just feet from Richardson. "I've been patrolling these streets for 7 years. 7 years, and I've never seen you here before." "I've lived here for 5 years," Richardson replied evenly, "and I've never had any trouble with the police before tonight." "Convenient that you have all your neighbors backing you up," Sloan sneered, gesturing to the crowd. "All saying what a great guy you are." Mrs. Chen stepped forward indignantly. "He is a great guy. He shovels my walkway when it snows. He drives my mother to her doctor appointments when I can't take off work. He coaches my son's little league team, Mr. Patel added. He organized the neighborhood watch program, called another voice from the back of the crowd. Richardson held up a hand, gently silencing his neighbors. Officer Sloan, I understand you were doing your job as you saw fit. But when I asked why I was being pulled over, which is my right as a citizen, you responded by drawing your weapon. That's not procedure. That's not protecting and serving. Sloan's face flushed red. You don't know what it's like out there. The things I've seen, the people I've had to deal with. Actually, I do know, Richardson replied, his voice remaining calm but taking on a deeper resonance that had all the neighbors listening intently. I've served in combat zones across 3 continents. I've made life-or-death decisions under enemy fire. I've buried friends and comrades. I understand duty, sacrifice, and threat assessment better than most. A third police car pulled up, and a woman in a crisp suit emerged, surveying the scene with sharp eyes. And yet, Richardson continued, in all my years of service, I've never approached a situation assuming the worst about the people involved. That's not strength. That's fear. That's enough, Officer Sloan, came a new voice. The woman in the suit approached, badge already out. I'm Lieutenant Harding, Internal Affairs. And you are now officially relieved of duty pending investigation. Sloan's mouth dropped open. What, you can't do that? This is standard procedure when an officer draws a weapon without clear justification. Lieutenant Harding cut in smoothly. Your body camera footage has already been flagged and preserved, as has your dash cam. Now I need your weapon and badge. The street fell completely silent as Officer Sloan stared at the lieutenant in disbelief. This is a joke, right? He finally managed. Does it look like I'm joking, officer? Lieutenant Harding held out her hand expectantly. For a moment, the tension in the air was so thick it seemed to vibrate. Richardson noticed Officer Lopez shifting slightly, positioning herself for quick intervention if needed. Sergeant Phillips had moved closer too, his hand not on his weapon but ready. With jerky, angry movements, Sloan unholstered his gun, carefully removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed it to Lieutenant Harding. His badge followed, practically slapped into her palm. Happy now? He spat, looking directly at Richardson. Richardson didn't respond, maintaining his composed stance. Officer Williams will drive you back to the station for processing, Lieutenant Harding stated, nodding toward a uniformed officer waiting by the 3rd patrol car. I suggest you use the time to consider your statement carefully. As Sloan was escorted away, the neighbors began to talk among themselves, the volume rising as the tension broke. Lieutenant Harding approached Richardson, extending her hand. Colonel Richardson, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. The captain sends his personal apologies and assurances that this matter will be handled with the utmost seriousness. Richardson shook her hand. That's good to hear, Lieutenant. Though I have to wonder why such immediate action is being taken. In my experience, these situations often move at a much slower pace. Lieutenant Harding's professional smile didn't waver, but her eyes showed understanding of his skepticism. Let's just say Officer Sloan's record wasn't spotless before tonight. There have been incidents, complaints. Nothing that stuck until now. Until there was undeniable video evidence, Richardson noted, and a decorated military officer as the victim, Dr. Rivera added, joining them. Let's be honest about why wheels are suddenly turning so quickly. Lieutenant Harding didn't deny it. The system isn't perfect, Doctor. But when we have a chance to address a problem, officer, we take it. As they walked toward Richardson's house, the neighbors gradually dispersed, though many promised to return to give statements. Tom Chen and several others were already sending video links to Officer Lopez's department email. Richardson unlocked his front door, holding it open for the officers to enter. His neat living room, with its simple furniture and framed photos of his unit members, suddenly seemed very small with so many people inside. I'd offer coffee, he said, but I think I need something stronger myself. He moved to the kitchen, returning with a bottle of whiskey and several glasses. Anyone else? Lieutenant Harding declined with a polite smile, but Sergeant Phillips accepted gratefully. As Richardson poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into glasses, Phillips asked quietly, You said earlier this wasn't your first experience with profiling? Richardson paused, the bottle still in hand. Through the window, he could see neighbors still lingering on the sidewalk, talking animatedly. Mrs. Chen was showing something on her phone to the Patels. Tom was explaining something to a group of younger neighbors, gesturing toward where Sloan had stood. "No," Richardson finally answered, setting down the bottle. It wasn't the first. But with all those cameras out there tonight and all these good people willing to speak up, he raised his glass slightly. "Maybe it will be the last." Sergeant Phillips raised his glass in return, but his expression remained troubled. "From your lips to God's ears, Colonel. But we both know this story is far from over." Morning light streamed through the blinds of Colonel Richardson's living room, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. It had been a long night. After the last police officer left his house around 2 a.m., Richardson had been too wired to sleep, his military training keeping him alert despite exhaustion. He sat at his kitchen table, coffee mug warming his hands, scrolling through messages on his phone. News traveled fast in small communities and even faster online. Tom Chen's video had been shared hundreds of times overnight, picked up by local news sites, and was now trending on several platforms. Richardson's phone had been buzzing nonstop with texts and calls from colleagues, friends, and even his commanding officer. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Through the peephole, he saw Mrs. Chen holding a covered dish, her son Tom standing beside her. "We brought breakfast," Mrs. Chen announced when he opened the door. "My special congee. Good for strength." Richardson smiled, genuinely touched. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, we did," she insisted, bustling past him into the kitchen. "After such a night, you need good food." Tom followed, his expression more serious than usual for a teenager. "The video's everywhere, Colonel. Over 50,000 views already." Richardson sighed, closing the door. "I noticed. Not exactly how I planned to become famous." Mrs. Chen was already finding bowls in his cabinet, moving around his kitchen with the familiarity of someone who had shared meals here before. "Famous for standing up to bullies is good famous," she said firmly, ladling the rice porridge into bowls. "Tom, get the toppings from the bag." As they settled around the table, Richardson's phone rang again. The caller ID showed Fort Meadows headquarters. "I should take this," he apologized, stepping into the living room. "Colonel Richardson speaking." "James, it's General Hayes." The familiar voice of his commanding officer filled the line. "I just saw the news. Are you all right?" "Yes, sir. Just some bruised pride." "Bullshit," Hayes replied bluntly. "I watched that video. You had a weapon pointed at you by a police officer for no good reason. That's not a bruised pride situation." Richardson glanced back toward the kitchen where the Chens were politely pretending not to listen. "It's being handled, sir." "Internal Affairs got involved immediately." "Damn right they did. I made some calls last night after I saw the footage. The mayor's office, the police commissioner, even the governor. You're one of my best officers, James. This isn't just going away." A twinge of unease ran through Richardson. "Sir, I appreciate the support, but I don't want special treatment because of my rank." There was a pause on the line. "This isn't about your rank, James. It's about right and wrong. What happened to you happens to people without your credentials every day, and they don't get immediate internal affairs investigations." The general's words hit home. Richardson had been thinking the same thing last night. "Take the day off," Hayes continued. "That's an order. And let me know if there's anything you need." "Thank you, sir." After ending the call, Richardson rejoined the Chens in the kitchen, the congee steaming invitingly in front of his seat. "Your boss?" Tom asked. Richardson nodded, picking up his spoon. "Concerned about the situation?" "Everyone is concerned," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Mr. Patel has organized a community meeting tonight at the recreation center. The whole neighborhood will be there." Before Richardson could respond, his doorbell rang again. This time it was Dr. Rivera holding a newspaper. "You've made the front page," he said grimly, handing the paper to Richardson as he entered. The headline read, "Army Colonel held at gunpoint in own neighborhood. Officer suspended." Below was a still from Tom's video, showing Richardson with his hands on his car roof, while Officer Sloan pointed his weapon. The image made Richardson's stomach tighten. "They're calling it a disturbing incident of apparent racial profiling," Dr. Rivera continued, accepting a bowl of congee from Mrs. Chen with a grateful nod. "The police department has issued a statement saying Officer Sloan has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation." Richardson set the paper down. "That was fast." "Like I said last night," Dr. Rivera replied. It's different when it happens to someone with your credentials. And when there's undeniable video evidence. Tom, who had been checking his phone, looked up excitedly. The video just hit national news. They're talking about it on Morning America right now. Richardson's phone began ringing again. This time a number he didn't recognize. He declined the call, only for another unknown number to immediately light up the screen. Reporters, Dr. Rivera guessed. They'll be showing up on your doorstep soon. As if on cue, a car with a local news logo pulled up outside. Richardson moved away from the window. I didn't ask for any of this attention, he said quietly. Mrs. Chen put a hand on his arm. Sometimes we don't ask for the battles we must fight. By noon, Richardson's quiet street had transformed into a media circus. Vans with satellite dishes lined the curb. Reporters stood in clusters on the sidewalk, and his phone had rung so many times he'd finally turned it off. He'd drawn the blinds and was sitting in his dimly lit living room when another knock came at his back door. It was Lieutenant Harding from Internal Affairs, alone this time and dressed in plain clothes. "Sorry to bother you," she said as he let her in through the kitchen. "I thought you might prefer to avoid the front door situation." "Good call," Richardson replied, offering her a seat at the kitchen table. "Coffee? Please." She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd had even less sleep than he had. As Richardson poured the coffee, Harding pulled out a tablet. "I wanted to update you personally on the investigation. Things are moving quickly, so I've noticed," Richardson said, nodding toward the front of the house where reporters could be heard calling questions to anyone who walked by. "The body camera footage confirms everything in the civilian videos," Harding continued, accepting the mug. "But there's more. We've been reviewing Officer Sloan's record in detail, and some patterns have emerged." Richardson sat across from her. "What kind of patterns?" Harding swiped through several files on her tablet. 12 complaints of excessive force or inappropriate conduct in the past 3 years. All filed by people of color. All dismissed due to lack of evidence or conflicting accounts. 12? Richardson set his mug down harder than intended, coffee sloshing over the rim. "This isn't just about last night anymore," Harding said, her voice low and serious. "Your case has opened a door to something much bigger. 3 of those previous complainants have already called in since seeing the news this morning, asking to reopen their cases." Richardson absorbed this information silently, thinking of what General Hayes had said about people without his credentials. "There's something else," Harding continued, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "We found concerning text messages on Sloan's department phone. Messages exchanged with 4 other officers that contain explicitly racist language and discussions about targeting certain neighborhoods and individuals." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. Richardson stood up, needing to move. "So this wasn't just one bad officer having a bad night?" "No," Harding admitted. "Though I want to be clear that the vast majority of our department doesn't operate this way. These 5 officers appear to be a closed group. 5 officers who've been patrolling our streets for years," Richardson noted, looking out the back window toward the neighborhood he'd called home. "How many lives have they affected? How many careers ruined with false charges? How many people intimidated into silence?" Harding didn't answer directly. "The commissioner has called a press conference for 3 o'clock today. He's announcing an expanded investigation with oversight from the state attorney general's office." Richardson turned back to face her. "And Officer Sloan?" "The district attorney is filing criminal charges this afternoon. Assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violations, official misconduct." She paused, checking another notification on her tablet, and apparently the FBI just opened a separate investigation into possible federal civil rights violations. The back door opened, startling them both. It was Mrs. Patel, carrying a large container of what smelled like curry. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, placing the container on the counter. "I thought you might need lunch with all those vultures out front. My husband is telling them all to leave you alone." Richardson introduced Lieutenant Harding, who stood to shake Mrs. Patel's hand. "Are you making sure that awful officer goes to jail?" Mrs. Patel asked bluntly. "My nephew was stopped by him last year when he was visiting us." The poor boy was terrified. Harding looked surprised. "Ma'am, if your nephew had an encounter with Officer Sloan, we'd very much like to take his statement." "I'll call him right now," Mrs. Patel said, pulling out her phone. "He's at medical school in Chicago, but I'm sure he'll talk to you." After Mrs. Patel left to make her call, Harding turned back to Richardson. "This is happening everywhere I go. Since this morning, people have been coming forward with stories about encounters with Sloan and the other officers in his group. The power of video evidence, Richardson said quietly. Without Tom Chen recording last night, this would be just another dismissed complaint. Harding nodded soberly. The community meeting tonight at the recreation center, I'll be there. The commissioner wants me to address everyone, explain the investigation process. She stood to leave. Will you be there, Colonel? Richardson hadn't planned on attending, preferring to let the situation play out through official channels. But Mrs. Chen's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Sometimes we don't ask for the battles we must fight. Yes, he said finally. I'll be there. As Lieutenant Harding slipped out the back door, Richardson's house phone rang, one of the few numbers he hadn't disconnected. It was General Hayes again. The governor just called me, Hayes said without preamble. He wants to meet with you before the community meeting tonight. Apparently he's planning to attend personally. Richardson closed his eyes, feeling the weight of unexpected responsibility settling on his shoulders. What had begun as a simple drive home was rapidly becoming something much larger than himself. James, Hayes said when Richardson didn't immediately respond. You know you're uniquely positioned here. Your military record is impeccable. Your community respects you. The media is listening. You can make sure this doesn't just fade away after a few news cycles. Outside, Richardson could hear reporters calling questions to someone walking past his house. Through the kitchen window, he saw neighbors delivering food to each other's homes, gathering in small groups, talking intently. Tell the governor I'll meet with him, Richardson said finally. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't just about what happened to me. This is about a system that allowed it to happen to countless others without consequence. Understood, Hayes replied. That's exactly why your voice matters right now. As Richardson hung up, he looked at the newspaper still lying on his kitchen table, his own face staring back at him from beneath that glaring headline. The journey from victim to advocate wasn't one he'd chosen, but it was one he was now determined to walk. The recreation center buzzed with voices as people filled every available seat. Richardson stood in a small office behind the main hall, watching through a crack in the door as the crowd continued to grow. What had been planned as a neighborhood meeting had swelled into something much larger. Community members from across the city had arrived, along with civil rights activists, veterans groups, and more reporters than Richardson could count. Quite the turnout, Governor Wilson observed, standing beside him. The governor had arrived 30 minutes earlier through a back entrance, accompanied by 2 aides and his security detail. Richardson nodded. I didn't expect this many people. I did, the governor replied. Your story touched a nerve, Colonel. It's the perfect storm. Decorated military officer, clear video evidence, long history of similar incidents. People who normally sit on opposite sides of these issues are finding common ground. Before Richardson could respond, the door opened and Police Commissioner Bryant entered, followed by Lieutenant Harding. The commissioner looked haggard, his tie slightly askew and dark circles under his eyes. Colonel Richardson, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for meeting with us before the main event. I wanted to personally express how deeply troubled I am by what happened. Richardson shook his hand firmly. I appreciate that, Commissioner. But I'm more concerned about what happens next. The commissioner gestured for everyone to sit around the small table in the center of the room. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. The internal investigation has uncovered troubling patterns. Lieutenant Harding has been leading the effort. Harding opened a folder. We've identified at least 37 incidents over the past 3 years involving Officer Sloan and his 4 associates, all targeting minority individuals, all following similar patterns of escalation, and all previously dismissed or buried, the governor added pointedly. Commissioner Bryant didn't deny it. There were procedural failures. Complaints weren't properly investigated. Body camera footage wasn't reviewed thoroughly. Supervisors didn't recognize or chose to ignore the patterns. Those aren't procedural failures, Richardson said quietly. Those are human failures. People making choices to look the other way. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. You're right, the commissioner finally said, and that's why I've made the decision to resign, effective immediately. I'm announcing it tonight. Richardson hadn't expected this. Resignation won't fix the system. No, but it makes room for someone who will, Bryant replied. The governor has already selected my replacement, Captain Diana Reynolds from the Community Policing Division. She's been fighting for reforms for years but kept hitting walls. Some of those walls were of my making, I'm ashamed to say. Governor Wilson leaned forward. Colonel Richardson, we'd like you to join the new police oversight committee we're forming. Your military experience with chain of command, your perspective as someone directly affected by these issues, and your standing in the community would be invaluable. Richardson hadn't come prepared for job offers. I already have duties at Fort Meadows. General Hayes has already agreed to a partial reassignment, the governor countered. He thinks your expertise would be valuable in police reform efforts. You've been discussing my career without me? Richardson couldn't keep the edge from his voice. The governor had the grace to look embarrassed. We've been exploring options. The decision is entirely yours, of course. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Tom Chen, looking both excited and nervous in a pressed button-down shirt. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but people are asking when the meeting will start and, there are some other people who want to talk to Colonel Richardson first. What other people? Lieutenant Harding asked. Tom stepped aside, revealing 3 men and 2 women standing in the hallway. Richardson didn't recognize them, but their expressions, a mixture of determination and unease, told him everything he needed to know. Previous complainants, Harding murmured, rising quickly. They've been coming forward all day. Richardson stood as well. Let them in. The 5 people entered hesitantly. One man, tall with graying temples, stepped forward first. I'm William Parker, he said. 2 years ago, Officer Sloan pulled me over, dragged me out of my car and threw me to the ground in front of my son. When I filed a complaint, they said there wasn't enough evidence. A woman beside him spoke next. Lisa Dawson. Sloan stopped me while I was jogging in my neighborhood, said I matched the description of a shoplifter, handcuffed me on the sidewalk for 45 minutes. One by one, they introduced themselves and shared similar stories. Richardson listened without interrupting, noting the details, the patterns, the trauma still evident in their voices. When they finished, the room fell silent again. Commissioner Bryant looked physically ill. Why are you here tonight? Richardson finally asked them. William Parker straightened his shoulders. Because you're being heard. Because they can't ignore your case like they ignored ours. We want to stand with you. Richardson glanced at the governor and commissioner, then back to the 5 civilians. No, he said firmly. I'll stand with you. Your stories came first. You tried to warn them about this officer and no one listened. That ends tonight. The governor checked his watch. It's time. The media is waiting. Richardson shook his head. The media can wait 5 more minutes. These people have been waiting years to be heard. Outside in the main hall, the crowd had grown restless. When Richardson finally stepped onto the small stage, followed by the governor, commissioner, and the 5 previous complainants, a hush fell over the room. Richardson recognized many of his neighbors in the front rows, the Chens, the Patels, Dr. Rivera, and dozens more. The commissioner spoke first, announcing his resignation and apologizing for the systemic failures that had allowed Officer Sloan and his associates to continue their pattern of abuse. The crowd murmured in surprise at this unexpected development. Governor Wilson spoke next, outlining the new oversight committee and introducing Captain Reynolds, a stern-faced woman who stood to acknowledge the crowd with a respectful nod. When it was Richardson's turn to speak, he stepped to the microphone and paused, looking out at the sea of faces. He hadn't prepared remarks, trusting his military experience with briefings to guide him. 2 nights ago, he began, I was driving home from work when I was pulled over without cause. You've all seen the video. What happened to me was wrong, but it wasn't unique. It wasn't special. He gestured to the 5 people standing behind him. These citizens experienced similar or worse treatment from the same officer. They filed complaints. They sought justice, and they were ignored. Richardson stepped aside, inviting William Parker to the microphone. One by one, the 5 shared abbreviated versions of their stories. The room grew increasingly tense, with audience members calling out in support or anger at what they were hearing. When the last speaker finished, Richardson returned to the microphone. The only difference between their cases and mine was that I had witnesses with cameras. I had a military title. I had privilege they didn't have. From the audience, a voice called out, and now Officer Sloan is going to prison. Richardson held up a hand. The justice system will determine Officer Sloan's fate. But this isn't just about one officer. This is about a system that protected him, That ignored warnings. That prioritized silence over accountability. He looked toward Captain Reynolds. The new leadership has promised changes, new oversight, new training, new accountability measures. But promises aren't enough. We need to ensure these changes happen and that they last. Mrs. Chen stood up from her seat in the front row. How do we do that? They'll just wait until the attention fades and go back to the old ways. Richardson nodded, acknowledging her concern. That's why I'm announcing tonight the formation of the Community Justice Alliance. A coalition of neighbors, community leaders, legal experts, and yes, good police officers who want reform. We'll monitor these promised changes. We'll support victims of police misconduct. We'll bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve. This announcement hadn't been planned, not even in his private meeting with the governor. The words had simply come to him as he stood there, seeing the need in the faces before him. Governor Wilson looked surprised but quickly recovered, stepping forward to express his support for the initiative. Captain Reynolds did the same, promising full cooperation with the new alliance. As the formal meeting transitioned to a question-and-answer session, Richardson stepped back, suddenly aware of how much his life had changed in just 48 hours. Dr. Rivera appeared at his side, offering a bottle of water. So, Rivera said quietly, from Army commander to community organizer overnight. That's quite a career shift. Richardson took a long drink before answering. Not as different as you might think. Both are about protecting people. Both require strategy, leadership, and knowing when to stand your ground. Across the room, he noticed Tom Chen recording everything on his phone, just as he had that first night. The teenager caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. The recording doesn't stop when the crisis ends, Richardson murmured, more to himself than to Rivera. What's that? Rivera asked. Richardson gestured toward Tom. He's still documenting everything. That's what we all need to do now. Keep the cameras rolling. Keep the pressure on. Keep the story alive until real change happens. A reporter approached, microphone extended. Colonel Richardson, do you believe justice will be served in your case? Richardson considered the question carefully. My case is just one piece of a much larger picture. Justice isn't just about punishing Officer Sloan. It's about changing the conditions that allowed him to operate unchecked for years. It's about ensuring no one else, with or without a military title, has to experience what I did. Or what these brave citizens behind me did. As more reporters gathered around, Richardson felt a strange calm settle over him. The fear and anger of that first night had transformed into something more powerful, a sense of purpose. He hadn't asked for this role, but now that it had found him, he would approach it with the same discipline and dedication he brought to his military service. The battle ahead would be different from any he'd fought before, but in many ways, the stakes were just as high. This wasn't about national security or foreign threats. This was about the fundamental promise of equal justice that formed the bedrock of the nation he'd sworn to defend. The courthouse. Steps were crowded with people holding signs, and news crews with cameras pointed toward the entrance. 3 weeks had passed since that night on Maple Avenue, and today was the preliminary hearing for Officer Derek Sloan. Richardson stood at the back of the crowd, hoping to enter quietly, but a reporter spotted him. Colonel Richardson, will you be testifying today? Heads turned and a path cleared as people recognized him. Richardson nodded politely to familiar faces as he made his way forward. He'd become something of a reluctant celebrity since the incident, his face appearing on national news programs and social media feeds across the country. William Parker fell into step beside him, along with Lisa Dawson, and the 3 other previous complainants who had joined forces with Richardson. They had all been called to testify about their experiences with Officer Sloan. Nervous? William asked quietly. Not about testifying, Richardson replied. I've given briefings to generals and politicians. A courtroom isn't so different. It is when you're the one who was wronged, Lisa pointed out. Trust me, I've been trying to get into a courtroom to tell my story for over a year. They passed through security and found seats in the courtroom, which was already nearly full. Lieutenant Harding, now promoted to captain after her work on the case, nodded to them from near the prosecutor's table. The district attorney, a stern woman named Helen Garcia, was arranging papers and speaking quietly with her assistants. At precisely 9 o'clock, a side door opened and Officer Sloan was led in, wearing a dark suit instead of his uniform. His face was thinner than Richardson remembered, his expression grim. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Richardson was surprised to see not hatred but something more complex. Perhaps resignation, or even shame. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Michael Freeman entered. The judge was a former military man himself, his posture still ramrod straight despite his 70 years. The proceedings began with formal charges: assault with a deadly weapon, official misconduct, civil rights violations, and filing false reports. Sloan stood as each charge was read, responding with a quiet, "not guilty" until the last charge. There he hesitated, glancing toward his attorney. After a whispered consultation, Sloan cleared his throat. "Guilty, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge called for order. "You're pleading guilty to filing false reports but not guilty to the other charges?" Judge Freeman clarified. "Yes, Your Honor," Sloan replied. The district attorney stood. "Your Honor, in light of the partial guilty plea, the state requests to present evidence related to the pattern of behavior by the defendant, including testimony from previous victims." Sloan's attorney objected, arguing that only the specific incident involving Colonel Richardson should be considered. Judge Freeman overruled him. "This court will hear testimony from all relevant witnesses," the judge declared. "The pattern of behavior is central to understanding the intent behind the defendant's actions on the night in question." Richardson was called to testify first. As he took the stand and was sworn in, he felt the weight of all eyes in the courtroom. He described the events exactly as they had happened, without embellishment or emotion. The prosecutor played Tom Chen's video, which still made Richardson's stomach tighten to watch. "Colonel Richardson," D.A. Garcia asked, "did you at any point threaten Officer Sloan or give him reason to fear for his safety?" "No," Richardson answered firmly. "I was cooperative throughout the encounter. I kept my hands visible and followed instructions, even while trying to understand why I had been stopped." "And in your professional military opinion, was drawing a weapon necessary or justified in that situation?" Richardson chose his words carefully. "In the military, we're trained that deadly force is the last resort, used only when there is a clear and present danger. There was no such danger in this situation." Sloan's attorney cross-examined him, trying to suggest that Richardson's military background might have made him seem threatening. Richardson calmly refuted this notion. "If anything," he explained, "my military training helped me remain calm and follow procedures during a high-stress situation." One by one, the other complainants testified, describing similar encounters with Officer Sloan. William Parker spoke of being thrown to the ground while his 10-year-old son watched in terror. Lisa Dawson described the humiliation of being handcuffed in her jogging clothes while neighbors passed by. Each story built upon the last, creating a damning portrait of an officer who routinely abused his power. After a lunch recess, Captain Harding took the stand to present evidence from the internal investigation. "We recovered text messages between Officer Sloan and 4 other officers," she testified, discussing their intentional targeting of minority residents in certain neighborhoods. She read several of the messages aloud, their crude language and overt racism causing gasps in the courtroom. "And were these other officers aware of Officer Sloan's conduct during traffic stops?" the DA asked. "Not only aware," Harding replied, "but encouraging it. They referred to it as teaching lessons to people who don't belong in certain neighborhoods." By late afternoon, when Officer Sloan finally took the stand in his own defense, the mood in the courtroom had grown increasingly somber. Richardson watched closely as Sloan swore to tell the truth, wondering what possible defense he could offer. "Officer Sloan," his attorney began, "please explain your actions on the night you encountered Colonel Richardson." Sloan cleared his throat. "I believed I was doing my job, protecting the neighborhood. We'd had reports of burglaries in the area, and I was on heightened alert." "Were there actually reports of burglaries that night?" his attorney asked. Sloan hesitated. "No, not that specific night." "Then why did you tell Colonel Richardson there were?" Another pause. "It was a pretext, something we often use to justify stops." "And why did you draw your weapon during this encounter?" Sloan stared at his hands. "I was trained to take control of situations, to establish authority quickly. When he questioned why I'd stopped him, I saw it as a challenge to my authority." The cross-examination was even more direct. "Officer Sloan," D.A. Garcia began, "is it not true that you and your colleagues specifically targeted people of color in affluent neighborhoods?" "Objection," Sloane's attorney called out. Calls for speculation about others' motives. I'll rephrase, Garcia said smoothly. Officer Sloane, did you specifically target Colonel Richardson because of his race? The courtroom fell completely silent, waiting for his answer. Sloane looked up, his eyes moving from the prosecutor to Richardson, then back. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I told myself it was about suspicious behavior, about protecting the community. But looking back, he took a deep breath. Yes, if he had been white driving the same car in the same neighborhood, I probably wouldn't have stopped him. The admission hung in the air. Richardson felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. There was no triumph in hearing this confession, only the heavy acknowledgement of an ugly truth. After Sloane stepped down, both sides presented their closing arguments. The judge announced he would review the evidence overnight and deliver his ruling the following morning. As people filed out of the courtroom, Richardson found himself face to face with Officer Sloane in the narrow hallway. For a moment, neither spoke. I'm sorry, Sloane finally said, his voice barely audible. Richardson studied the man's face. I'm not the only one who deserves an apology. Sloane nodded, glancing toward William Parker and the others who stood a few feet away. I know. Before more could be said, Sloane's attorney guided him away toward a private conference room. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed around Richardson and the other complainants, shouting questions. Richardson raised his hands for quiet. We'll have a formal statement after the ruling tomorrow, he said. For now, we're grateful that the facts are finally being heard in a court of law. As the crowd dispersed, Tom Chen approached with his mother. The teenager had become an unofficial documentarian of the entire case, his original video having now been viewed millions of times. Do you think he'll go to prison? Tom asked. Richardson placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. That's for the judge to decide. What matters is that the truth came out, because of you and your camera. Mrs. Chen beamed proudly at her son. He's thinking about studying journalism now. That evening, Richardson's house once again became a gathering place. The Chens, the Patels, Dr. Rivera, and the 5 complainants all crowded into his living room, sharing a potluck dinner and speculating about the judge's ruling. Whatever happens tomorrow, William Parker said, raising his glass in a toast, things are already changing. The new Oversight Committee has reviewed over 50 old complaints. 4 more officers have been suspended. The training program is being completely redesigned. And the Community Justice Alliance has over 300 members now, Lisa Dawson added, from every neighborhood in the city. Richardson nodded, taking in the faces around him, people who had been strangers just weeks ago, now united in purpose. This was never just about Officer Sloane, he said quietly, or even about what happened to me that night. It was about breaking a pattern, about saying enough. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded. Judge Freeman entered and called the court to order, his expression grave. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, he began, This court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the room. Richardson remained still, watching Sloane's shoulders slump slightly at the verdict. Before I pass sentence, the judge continued, I want to address something. This case has revealed not just one officer's misconduct, but systemic failures that allowed that misconduct to continue unchecked for years. That is a stain on our justice system that extends far beyond this courtroom. Judge Freeman turned his attention directly to Sloane. However, you, Officer Sloane, must be held accountable for your individual choices. The oath you took to protect and serve was sacred, and you violated it repeatedly. Your actions have damaged public trust and brought shame to the many good officers who serve honorably. The judge paused, consulting his notes. I hereby sentence you to 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Your police certification is permanently revoked. You will also perform 1,000 hours of community service after release, specifically in minority communities affected by police misconduct. As Sloane was led away in handcuffs, Richardson felt no joy, only a somber satisfaction that accountability had finally been established. Outside the courthouse, standing before a forest of microphones, Richardson delivered a brief statement that he and the others had prepared together. Today's verdict is not the end, but a beginning, he said. One case does not fix a broken system, but it does prove that change is possible when we stand together, when we document injustice, and when we refuse to be silent. He gestured to the diverse group standing behind him. His neighbors, the other complainants, members of the new Community Justice Alliance, and even Captain Reynolds, the new police commissioner. The real work starts now, Richardson concluded. Building bridges, restoring trust, creating a justice system that truly protects and serves everyone equally. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Richardson felt Dr. Rivera's hand on his shoulder. You know, Rivera said quietly, when you moved into our neighborhood 5 years ago, I never imagined you'd end up leading a movement for police reform. Richardson smiled slightly. Neither did I. But sometimes the battle finds you even when you're just trying to drive home.